Greetings. Before we start the program, little housekeeping up top. If you would like to support Ill Repute, we do have a Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Ill Repute, you can join our Patreon. We have one tier. It's $5. You treat it like a tip jar. It just helps us with overhead costs like, streaming and programs and editing and all the good stuff.
Hosting.
If you can't afford to tip, that is totally fine. Other ways you can support, you can rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Please only give it 5 stars. Thank you. Not asking for your actual opinion, asking for your helpful opinion. And we have a Reddit. Our subreddit is Ill Repute Podcast. We monitor it, and you can drop a comment, say hi, you can suggest episodes, you can talk about episodes, and we will respond and say hi back and all the things. And if you join the Patreon, we do have occasional bonus content. So there's that. Now.
And you have our appreciation. And you live a little bit in our hearts.
That's right.
And rent there is really, let me tell you.
Yeah. Okay. Now to begin. Greetings and welcome to Ill Repute, the podcast about women and women first. I'm Sovereign Syre, a writer, comedian, and someone that became Black one summer. I remember the day clearly. I just decided one day, if you don't get that, it's a reference to Donald Trump's disastrous interview with the Black Journalist Association when asked if Kamala Harris was a DEI hire. And he said, well, I didn't know she was Black until a few years ago. I always thought she was Indian. And then one day she decided she wanted to be Black. And then all of a sudden she's Black.
Yeah.
Hence my reference.
Like a berry growing ripe on the bush.
Who doesn't remember the summer they turned Black? They decided they were Black and then came back from it.
Lord.
Yeah. Also certified mermaid, thank you.
Yes, you are. And I am Ella Darling, a VR pioneer, former librarian, current library volunteer, thank you very much, and a dryad at this point. I look outside, I'm in the trees. I walk out naked in the morning and there's just trees watching me and there's a pond over there and you can hear the frogs at night. It is way different than anything I'm used to. And it's really nice.
Oh, I love that
but
for
I'm
you.
becoming one with the forest, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that is your element. That is, you are a little bird. You are just a little bird perched in the bough of a tree.
Now, we here at Ill Repute support women's rights. But more importantly,
we support women's wrongs.
Now, Savi, which women's wrongs are we righting today?
Today, I am going to tell you the story of the lone woman of San Nicolas Island, whose story was most famously recounted in the 1961 Newbery Award-winning young adult book, Island of the Blue Dolphins.
By, it looks like, Scott Odell. Newbery Award winners are a pretty big deal in the youth literature community.
If you grew up in California, but when I was looking around on Reddit, it was pretty universal. Between 4th and 6th grade, this was a book that you were given to read, but especially in California because it takes place in California. And it is like a young adult classic. And it's unique for a lot of things. It has a young female protagonist. There are no men. And it features her in a traditionally masculine role, which is surviving on her own on an island.
How does a girl even do that?
I don't know.
Well, I'm very excited to hear your take on it. So, since its publication, Island of the Blue Dolphins is a fictionalized telling of the story of a Nicoleño woman abandoned on San Nicolas Island for 20 years, often credited as the last of her tribe. Since its publication, the book has been a staple in American curricula. The very sanitized story told in the book, featuring a 12-year-old girl who learns to survive on her own by finding harmony with the land and animals that surround her, manages to tell the story of the lone woman without telling us anything about her at all. In effect, the book serves as a colonialist propaganda. And today, we're going to correct the record. Fuck yeah. That's my fucking sovereign ass Syre shit.
Because that's what we do, son. Anyway, so our story begins in the Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California. The Channel Islands were first inhabited over 13,000 years ago by Paleo Indians. The remains of Arlington Springs Man on Santa Rosa Island are among the oldest human remains found in North America. By the time of European contact, the northern islands were inhabited by the Chumash people and the southern islands by the Tongva people.
Have we discussed the Tongva before?
We have acknowledged their land.
Oh, yes. The Tongva, also known as the Gabrielino, traditionally inhabited the Los Angeles Basin and Southern Channel Islands, so San Clemente, San Nicolas, Santa Catalina, and Santa Barbara Islands. Their territory included diverse environments such as coastal areas, rivers, mountains, and valleys, providing a wide range of resources. The Tongva lived in large, permanent villages with structures made from willow branches and tule reeds. Each village had a chief and specialized roles, such as shamans, craftsmen, and hunters. Their diet included fish, shellfish, marine mammals, deer, small game, acorns, seeds, nuts, and various plants. They were proficient in fishing, hunting, and gathering.
These were the people that basically occupied like Los Angeles, the San Fernando Valley, the coastal regions around there, you know, kind of between like Santa Barbara and San Diego. And then in California off the southern coast, there are the Channel Islands now, like Santa Barbara Island, Catalina Island, mainly known these days for dolphin watching and whale watching. But we still get a lot of that kind of traffic on our coast. So that's like a very popular thing to do. And the main way people know the Channel Islands is because Catalina Island is very famous as kind of a very Tony sort of place to hang out for the day. You have to ferry or take a helicopter in. The Wrigley Mansion is there, you know, and there's buffalo there, the glass bottom boats. Like, so this is an area of the coast that even still has very clear waters, a lot of biodiversity, a lot of marine life, really rich with like seaweed and kelp and all kinds of stuff. So if you were someone that had to live off the land, there is a lot there. There's quite a variety. The Tongva were also skilled artisans, known for their basket weaving, shell bead production, and tool making. They also built plank canoes similar to the Chumash tomols for navigating the coastal waters. The Tongva had a rich spiritual and ceremonial life with a belief system centered around nature, ancestral spirits, and creation myths. They conducted various rituals and ceremonies, including those related to the seasons and life events.
Like the Chumash, the Tongva were significantly affected by the establishment of Spanish missions in the late 18th century. The missions sought to convert and assimilate the Tongva, leading to dramatic population decline, cultural disruption, and loss of traditional practices. Despite these challenges, the Tongva adapted in various ways and continued to maintain aspects of their cultural identity and heritage.
So for listeners not familiar with California history, the missions were a project of the Spanish crown, and there's I think 12 or 13, maybe less, maybe 10, that kind of stretched from San Diego up to like, I think like Monterey. And they were designed to essentially conscript natives into labor and convert them. And these missions were meant to become fully self-sustaining. And a lot of them did. They became cities like Los Angeles, San Gabriel, Santa Barbara, San Juan Capistrano.
So those are all because they had missions there.
Yes.
That's why they're named that.
Yes.
That is fat. I learned so much from you, and that's why I love this.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, a lot of that changed around the events in this story when Mexico liberated itself from the Spanish crown. And so then they like secularized the missions. And then Californios, who were very wealthy plantation owners, farmers, etc., would buy up all of the lands that were around the mission and things like that. So it kind of was a topsy-turvy time. And that was in 1835 And then in like 1850 is when California and the rest of Mexico got annexed into California. And that line, if you remember the Olive Oatman episode, that took place right after that war. And they were like right on the border, this new border, right? And so once that came in, then all these Americans came in and displaced the Californios who were for America taking them because they thought they were going to be sitting pretty. But then as soon as California became part of the United States, Americans came in and kicked them out of their big fancy houses and took over their fancy houses. And that is how colonization works. That's how it always works.
Relationships that start with cheating never make it.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Among the Channel Islands, the most distant is that of San Nicolas, situated approximately 61 miles off the coast of Southern California. It covers about 22 square miles and has a rugged landscape with cliffs, sandy beaches, and rolling hills. The island has a semi-arid climate with mild temperatures, limited freshwater sources, and predominantly low vegetation like grasses and shrubs. So off the coast of California and Southern California, it does rain here, but not very much. Like, I'm going to keep it real with everybody. No one is going to keep you chained to Los Angeles like the weather. So yeah, the Channel Islands, like a very mild, nice climate year round. Not a lot of huge trees and like fruit and stuff, and San Nicolas, yeah, it's like 60 miles out. There's not any like kind of permanent anything there now, but other islands were like kind of settled and had things, but it's kind of like cliffy and low vegetation and like not as nice maybe, or not with as many resources as say the other islands. So the other islands were just like more attractive, right? Like the kind of people tended to want to settle there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Archaeological evidence suggests that San Nicolas Island was inhabited for at least 10,000 years, with the Nicoleño people being its last known indigenous inhabitants. The first recorded European contact was in the early 17th century, when Spanish explorers charted the island. However, significant contact did not occur until the 19th century with the arrival of Russian and Aleut fur traders.
So up in Alaska, right, along the Bering Strait, the North Sea up there, there is an archipelago known as the Aleutian Islands. And this is also a period in history where Alaska did not belong to the United States yet. It was part of Russia. And the Aleutians is actually multiple different tribes, but they were the people that inhabited these islands, in the Aleutian archipelago. So some were like mainland Russia, what we would say today, and others were mainland Russia, which today we would call Alaska. And kind of like the Tongva and the Chumash, who were on the mainland and on the islands, they were like on the mainland and on the islands, and each was its own distinct tribe. So Aleutian we're just kind of generally describing from this area. And part of that is because I had to look through so many historical records with this stuff, and people weren't necessarily great record keepers. So you have to kind of just go with the language they used in a lot of cases because there wasn't anything kind of more specific. But where there was, I've made the effort to make those distinctions. So just kind of, but that like the Aleuts were the native folks in Alaska on the islands.
So it's Aleuts.
Yeah, and they're the Aleutian Islands. Yeah.
Okay. I think I call them Aleut.
But that's kind of, that's kind of a historical term. I mean, now if you knew which tribe, you would just use that.
Use the tribe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before European contact, it is estimated that the Nicoleño people numbered around 200 to 300. They lived in dome-shaped huts made from whale bones, driftwood, and thatched with reeds. Their diet primarily consisted of marine resources, including fish, seals, seabirds, and shellfish. They also gathered plant foods like seeds, roots, and berries. The Nicoleño crafted tools and utensils from bones, shells, and stones. They made fishing hooks, needles, and bowls. They also created intricate baskets and ornaments. And so one of the things is, one of the artifacts they collected is like the ability to weave these baskets that were like completely waterproof.
Oh, wow.
Really cool. Really, really
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
The Nicoleño culture was influenced by neighboring Chumash people with whom they traded and shared similarities in language and customs. Due to their remote location, the Nicoleño maintained a distinct cultural identity, though they were not completely isolated from mainland tribes and occasional visitors. However, everything changed in 1813, when Russian fur traders brought a party of Aleuts, or Kodiak Indians, to the islands and left them there to hunt sea otters.
So the only source I could find was consistently in newspapers from like the 1830s and 40s, sort of after this had happened, named them Kodiak Indians. So I went and looked it up. And so that's what they were called historically. So let me see what specific tribe. Kodiak Island is the ancestral land of the Sugpiaq, an Aleutic nation of the Native Americans. The Aleut people, also known as the Unangang, traditionally inhabit the Aleutian Islands, Pribilof Islands, and parts of the Alaskan Peninsula. These areas are characterized by rugged coastlines, volcanic islands, and a cold marine climate, obvi. The Aleutian Islands stretch over 1,000 miles between the Alaskan Peninsula and Russia.
Oh, wow.
So
you've included a really cool image here. Can you describe it and tell me what's going on?
Yeah. So this is Aleutian hunters, and they are in these long kind of kayak-y looking boats. They're seated in there, and then they have these really baller visors. They're like very long, like imagine a super long bill on a baseball cap.
And stepped.
And yeah. And so those are to protect your eyes from the sun when you're in the super bright reflected light of the snow-capped glaciers and other things. So it allowed you to be able to, hunt better and see better. That's also, they had these basically eyeglasses that were just like pieces of wood with two slits in the front that would also help to like reduce the amount of bright light so that you could actually see. And, it's like, because a lot of your hunting, when you're dealing with animals that are very adapted to the environment, your vision has to be pretty spot on to recognize prey moving around. Super
Those
cool.
kind of glasses are basically like manually squinting your eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fur trade in the North Pacific began in earnest in the mid-18th century when Russian explorers, including Vitus Bering of the Bering Strait and Alexei Chirikov, reached the Aleutian Islands. They discovered the rich sea otter populations whose pelts were highly valued for their warmth and luxury. Now, I said at the beginning, this is a story about colonization, and this is a kind of like colonization feedback loop, this story. So, Ella?
I, too, have a pelt that is highly valued for its warmth and luxury.
There she is. There she is.
Since 1775, Russian fur trader Grigory Shelikhov has been trading with Alaskan natives in the Kuril and Aleutian Islands of present-day Alaska. That is a very long time for that individual trader to be trading.
Yeah.
In April 1784, he returned to found a settlement on Kodiak Island and the coast of the mainland. The people occupying the area initially resisted and fled to the secluded Stack Island Refuge Rock. Can you help me with pronunciation on this word?
Awauk.
Awauk. Awauk in the Aleutic language, approximate meaning where one becomes numb. And this was Partition Cove on the Sitkalidak Island. I had to lean in because my eyes ain't what they used to be.
Yeah.
It was across Old Harbor in the Kodiak archipelago. Archipelago.
Yeah.
I only read that word, so I mispronounce it.
Yeah. The Russian Promishlenniki, which were like the hunters, traders, attacked the people on the island by shooting guns and cannons, slaughtering an estimated 200 to 500 men, women, and children on Refuge Rock. Some sources state the number killed was as many as 2,000 or 3,000 persons. Following the attack of Awauk, Shelikov claimed to have captured over 1,000 people, detaining some 400 as hostages, including children. The Russians suffered no casualties.
That's insane. Now, those are very large numbers. Do you happen to have any context as to how many people were there on the island? Because that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of. I think there's only. I'm not gonna quote the number. I just heard it in a YouTube video. The population of Alaska today is like the population of a few of the big football high schools in Texas combined in the largest state in our union. So that seems like, especially for them, that seems like a huge percentage of their population. But I don't know.
I imagine it was. And archaeological evidence that was unearthed on San Nicolas Island after like some kind of weather event happened, uncovered a graveyard with like close to 1,000 skeletons that were kind of large in stature, like people like maybe 7 feet tall. So at one time on the island, there had been like some kind of a massacre, but we don't know how long ago it was. But so, yeah, like there were a lot of people, not now, but because they could thrive in the environment, right? Like they were adapted to the environment.
Right.
Yeah.
This massacre was an isolated incident, but the violence and taking of hostages resulted in the Alutiiq becoming completely subjugated by Russian traders thereafter. The years 1784 to 1818 were called the darkest period of Sugpiaq history, as the Russians treated the people incredibly badly. They also suffered high mortality from infectious diseases unwittingly introduced by the Russians.
So what they would do, now this is all important. I'm building a story here. This is a story of colonization. So you have this group down in San Nicolas, small in number, but a distinct peoples. In 1784, Russians encounter these people on Kodiak Island, basically destroy the population and completely subjugate the people. And how they would do it is they would take their wives and children and hold them hostage and force them into slave labor to get their wives and children back. That's how they would compel them to work for them for free. So
that seems like it is still a tactic in Russia today.
I would not be surprised.
To some degree. Yeah.
The Russian American Company, chartered by the Russian government in 1799, monopolized the fur trade in Alaska. It established trading posts and settlements exploiting the region's natural resources. The Russians forced the Aleuts into labor, making them hunt sea otters and other fur-bearing animals. The Aleuts were skilled hunters, and their knowledge of the local environment was crucial to the success of the fur trade.
The fur trade brought significant disruption to the Aleut society. Exposure to new diseases, harsh working conditions, and violent conflicts led to a dramatic decline in the Aleut population. The presence of Russian traders and settlers led to cultural changes, including the introduction of Russian Orthodox Christianity. Many Aleuts converted to Christianity, blending it with their traditional beliefs. Now, I wonder, sincerely, I'm not being facetious here, I wonder how much of that conversion was to get into the good graces of the people who were holding their families hostages to try to get them the back. Or how much of it was just sincere.
I think it's that. And I think there's also like, if aliens came down from space and just started obliterating us and then like telling us what to do and saying that they knew better, that they had a different God, and this God was like the powerful God and had imbued them with the power to destroy us, might be a compelling argument. I feel like it's a little bit this, a little bit that. I think it's it's malicious compliance. It's like, we're going to say this out loud, but when we go back in the hut, like, we don't believe it. And then part of it would be kind of like, I don't know, like, maybe I don't, an alien just landed on the island and killed a bunch of people. Like, I feel like maybe they have access to power I don't. Right? I think it's probably...
Everything I knew kind of got smashed against the wall when they got here. So I don't know which way is up anymore. Maybe.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's kind of a weird combination. According to the Russian American Company records, which were translated and published in the Journal of California and Great Basin Anthropology, a 200-ton otter hunting ship named Yemena, with a mixed nationality crew, including a majority Aleut contingent, was involved in conflict resulting in a massacre of the indigenous natives of San Nicolas Island.
In 1814, to obtain more of the commercially valuable otter pelts, a Russian company brought a party of conscripted Aleut hunters to the coastal island of San Nicolas, near the Alta California, Baja California border. Now that's southish, I think.
Yeah.
The locally resident Nicoleño nation sought a payment from the Aleut hunters for the large number of otters being killed in the area. Disagreement arose, turning violent. An Aleut was killed, and in retaliation, Aleuts killed a number of the Nicoleño. These, Kodiak Indians, as they were called in contemporary news accounts, stayed for 2 years, likely having children with the surviving Nicoleño women and likely killing many Nicoleño with diseases they carried with them.
So we're painting a picture. So these enslaved Aleut are forced to come do otter hunting all the way down in the Channel Islands because they've already been depleting what's up there. So now they're coming down here to deplete what we have down here. The nature of the conflict changes a lot. So we're going to bear with this narrative. There are a lot of competing narratives around what happened. But what we know is there were like 200 to 300 Nicoleño when they landed. There was a massacre. And when they left 2 years later, there were like 13 Nicoleño left.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. The next encounter with the Nicoleño happened in 1835. The following is from a newspaper article in 1853. Quote, "The Indian on this island were in the habit of making frequent excursions to the mainland, touching at Santa Barbara and San Pedro for the purpose of trading with the Indians who were living in the southern part of the state, and the barter was carried on by means of shells, which was the principal medium of exchange between them."
So San Pedro is what the port of the city of Los Angeles was known as, just for those following along. At the time, the missions of Alta California were established. Toward the close of the last century, this intercourse was carried on to a great extent, and at a certain period of the year, there was a sort of Indian fair held at some point of the southern coast, whither the Indians of the islands and the continent repaired in great numbers, where at the solicitation of the good Franciscan fathers, or from choice, the Indians on the islands gradually settled down among the mission Indians at Santa Ynez, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, San Gabriel, and San Diego. So I'm going to cut in with some commentary.
Yes.
So what the author is saying is all of these tribes, the Nicoleño were like related to the Tongva, right? Like Tongva is like many different little tribes, right? So what they're saying is what they used to do is they could travel inter-island, and they did travel to like Santa Barbara and San Pedro to trade with each other and communicate. And there was like a time of year where they would like all show up and on the mainland, and the Franciscan friars who ran the missions would then be like, you should come be at the mission and get converted and be one of us. And that's why the wording from choice, with the solicitation of the good Franciscan fathers or from choice, keep in mind this is written in 1853. the Indians on the islands gradually settled down among the mission Indians. Totally above board. Total above boards. The article continues. One of these islands, called San Nicolas, about 60 miles from Santa Barbara, was inhabited by a tribe of Indians who could never be induced from a desire of change, from the hope of greater comfort, or from a wish to embrace Christianity to leave it. So basically, everyone else eventually got enticed into the mission system, but the Nicoleño were like, nah, no thank you. No interest. I am good to go.
We're spoken for.
Yeah.
All right. The article continues. About the year 1815, this island was visited by a Russian ship, and some dispute having arisen between the sailors and the Indians about the women, the Russians killed all the men except 2 and carried off the women. About 20 years afterwards, Mr. Williams, who now owns the ranch called Del Chino in Los Angeles, with other Americans, had been in the habit of visiting the island while hunting otters, which abound in those waters.
The article goes on. At one of these visits, he brought away with him on his departure a young Indian squaw, which means cunt.
Which is the word they use in the article, not one we choose to use.
Yeah, I mean, this trigger warning up top. We're going to be reading from old stuff, and this is how people talked. And rather than sanitize it, I think it's better to just read it and let it stand. And, you know, because like if we elite it, it's like it never happened. So like, let's not do that. But I grew up near Squaw Valley. Squaw Pass, Squaw Cliff. One so named because a bunch of Native women were gathered up and tied up together and were going to be raped and sex trafficked by Americans. And they all held hands and jumped off the cliff together to avoid being raped by the white guys. So, you know, anyway,
that's
history.
Horrifying.
Yeah. But history. Like, so I'm someone that grew up with places just straight up called Squaw Valley. That was a great skiing resort. They have recently changed it, but I mean, it stood for a long time.
You said it, but I kind of stepped on it. Will you just, as a brief aside, inform anybody who is not aware what squaw means, why we don't use it, etc.?
It means, so it's not saying Indian woman. It's saying, look at that. That's why it's offensive, because it in addition to being a slur, it's like it's reducing, because people just think that means maiden, and it doesn't. Mm-hmm. It means sex hole. At this time, there were about 17 Indians living on the island. Shortly afterward, so here's the story. At one of the visits, Mr. Williams, who owns Chino, California, was visiting the island hunting otters, and in one of these visits, brought away with him a young Nicoleño girl. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Williams prevailed upon Mr. Hubbard, who was captain of a small schooner, owned co-jointly by Mr. Isaac Sparks, now of Santa Barbara, and Mr. Gomez of Monterey, to bring over all the Indians who remained. This was easily accomplished as the Indians were desirous to remove.
Were they, though? Were they? Because it seems like they weren't.
I'll take did not happen for $500.
Yeah.
It's like, but like a guy goes, he's like, hey, I just went and like took a young girl as a sex hole. Let's go get all the others. Let's get some more sex holes and slaves to work my ranch. Let's go do it, because that's what's being described here.
Right.
Very romantically by the newspaper, by the way. Very romantically.
Didn't it just say they didn't want this? Exactly. And now all of a sudden, when a white guy forces them off of their home, out of their home, they were desirous.
Yeah.
Oh, were they? I'm sure the young girl you kidnapped was super desirous too.
It gets worse.
The article continues. After they had all got on board the schooner, one of the Indian women discovered that her child was missing and asked permission to go on shore to look for it. Not them. This was at once granted. She remained a long time in search and at length made her appearance, crying most bitterly. She said that she could not find her child and expressed her apprehension that it had been eaten by wild dogs which infest the island. She remained on the beach lamenting the loss of her child, and whether through fatigue or excessive grief, she laid down and fell asleep. That's horrible. It's getting worse. That sound means I hate that sound.
She just fell asleep. The article continues. In the meantime, it commenced to blow a gale of wind, and the schooner put away, leaving her alone on the desert island. Unquote. 2 days later, the Nicoleños were landed in San Pedro, the port of Pueblo, Los Angeles. And at that time, they were all baptized either in Los Angeles or at the San Gabriel Mission, which was just further back. It was like 10 more miles inland from the port and sort of right next to sort of the Pueblo, Los Angeles.
Today, San Gabriel is just, when you talk about it, you just call it LA.
Yeah.
Unless you're there.
Yeah. The mission was built and run using what has been described as slave labor from nearby Tongva villages, such as Yanga, and was built on the site of the village of Toviscanga. When the nearby Pueblo de Los Angeles was built in 1781, the mission competed with the emerging Pueblo for control of indigenous labor. Indigenous slaves, not labor. Thank you.
Over 25,000 baptisms were conducted at San Gabriel between 1771 and 1834. So, roughly 60 plus-ish years?
Mm-hmm.
Making it the most prolific in the chain of missions. Tongva people from nearby settlements like Acaranga village were affected by the practices of Franciscan missionaries who attempted to eradicate what they perceived as ills with Tongva society. Through religious indoctrination, labor, restructuring of gender structures, and violence, which took place at and around the mission. A missionary during this period reported that 3 out of 4 children died at Mission San Gabriel before reaching the age of 2. Nearly 6,000 Tongva lie buried in the grounds of the San Gabriel mission.
Yeah. What's that? It's just the pit full of bodies. Just don't even look at that. Don't even look. We're going to throw some dirt over it later. It's all goodsies. It's all goodsies. So this is so normal.
We'll say Christian prayer over them.
It's just, yeah. We threw some blood of Jesus over. It's all good. Forgiven. Everything. Oh.
Yeah.
The goal of the missions was to become self-sufficient in relatively short order. Farming was the most important industry of any mission. Prior to the missions, the Native Americans had developed a complex, self-sufficient culture. The mission priests established what they thought of as a manual training school to teach the Indians their style of agriculture, the mechanical arts, and the raising and care of livestock. The missions, utilizing the slave labor of neophytes, which would be a converted mission Indian, produced everything they used and consumed. After 1811, mission Indians could be said to sustain the entire military and civil government of California.
Wow.
Yeah.
Holy.
Yep. I'm not going to devolve too far, but if you watch a documentary called The West by Ken Burns, there is a whole chapter just about the that we did in California. Like if you encountered a Native American and they looked like they didn't have a job, you could arrest them and conscript them and take them as a slave. They could just grab a female Native and put her into concubinage, and it was legal.
Jesus.
Like, don't get it twisted.
Wait, so if
the South is not the only place that has to answer for we did it too. Like us too. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if they looked like they didn't have a job.
Yeah. He's indigent. How's he gonna prove that do you know what I mean?
Show him your W-2, man.
Yeah.
Obvi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ranchos were established in a wide area for raising cattle, sheep, and other livestock. Many of the Native Americans lived in communities called rancherias. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's what if you're native in California is like a kind of tricky thing because it was like small bands and families instead of like kind of these much larger tribal configurations. So it kind of made conquest a little easier because there wasn't kind of all of that community, like there wasn't, the ties weren't kind of the same. So it was a lot of kind of like self-sufficient little units of maybe 5 families, right? And then those are the Gabrielianos or what, you know what I mean? Like sort of, so
a rancho was a collection of families?
Yeah. So the reservations in California are called the rancheros. So like instead of being on like a reserve or a reservation, it's a rancheria or like whatever. So just like California subnote.
Is that like Rancho Cucamonga, for example? Was that the origin of that?
I mean, I think now they're called reserves, but some of them are still called, like in the Central Valley where I'm from, they're still called rancherias or rancheros.
Okay.
But I think like Cucamonga and stuff like that, like now I think they're called, I think they're called reservations now, like to the federal government.
Well, that's the name of the suburb outside of LA.
Yeah, but like but
now they have better
the casino out there and all of that stuff. I think now that's changed.
Okay.
Like, yeah. What I'm saying is in small, like I'm in the Central Valley, in smaller rural areas, like there's still rancheros and they may only have like 8 people left in the tribe. You know what I mean? Like just because of urbanization and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a little more tricky in California when it comes to native status and all of those kinds of things because there wasn't like a big official contract with the government like the 5 civilized tribes got in Indian Territory, Oklahoma / in the East. They had the ability to create these treaties with the government that just wasn't as accessible to tribes in California because of just the way they were structured. There are some that are bigger than others, but it just like, it's like the relationship between natives and white settlement was very different. And they were like Native Americans are not like a monolith. The way that people lived in California versus the way tribes existed in the Southeast were very different. And so they experienced colonization in very different ways, is what I'm coming to say. But I'm going to stop talking out of my ass so I don't get in trouble. Okay.
To efficiently manage its extensive lands, Mission San Gabriel established several outlying submissions known as asistencias. Several of these became or were included in land grants following the Mexican secularization of the missions in the 1830s.
After the secularization, which means they de-Christianized it. If you don't know, that's when like you take a consecrated building and then you unconsecrate it. And then like now it's just a regular building instead of being a church. So after the secularization of the missions in 1835, so 1835 is also when the Nicoleños got swooped up, the friars were divested of authority and many private Californios bought up the lands. It is very likely that the schooner was commissioned to collect the inhabitants of San Nicolas Island in order to conscript slaves. Now, very recently, unearthed records have revealed the names of the Nicoleños that arrived and were baptized in Los Angeles and at Mission San Gabriel. So this is from the National Park Service.
Quote, Black Hawk, a California Indian who lived at San Pedro near Los Angeles. Black Hawk was given this name by the crew of the ship Alert. According to George Nidever, who cares?
Yeah.
And William Dane Phelps, Black Hawk came from San Nicolas Island when the islanders were brought to the mainland in 1835. Secondary accounts state Black Hawk died from a fall in 1845 and was buried on Dead Man Island in San Pedro Bay. In 1928, the island was dredged away, removed, as part of improvements to the San Pedro harbor.
So he Black Hawk was the only Nicoleño that stayed in San Pedro, and it was said that he refused to go to the missions and would just stand on the beach all the time looking out towards the island, and that his death was a suicide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he jumped to his death. Juana. In her 20s, this island Indian woman was baptized as Juana at the Los Angeles Plaza Church in March 1836. Because her baptism took place after the schooner Peores Nada brought the Nicoleños to San Pedro, it is highly likely that she was one of the Nicoleños on board. After the baptism, Juana appears to have lived with her godmother's family until at least 1844.
Maria Aleja. When she was about 45 years old, this island Indian was baptized as Maria Aleja at the Los Angeles Plaza Church in July 1836. She is highly likely to be one of the San Nicolas Island natives who sailed from the island to Los Angeles in 1835. Her baptism occurred shortly after the arrival of the schooner Peores Nada, which brought the Nicoleños to San Pedro.
Maria Luciana. As a newborn, this Indian girl was baptized Maria Luciana at the Los Angeles Plaza Church in May 1836. Her unbaptized parents were identified as island Indians. Given the timing of her baptism, Maria Luciana's parents could have sailed from San Nicolas Island to San Pedro on the schooner Peores Nada in 1835. It is possible that Maria Luciana and her parents were Nicoleños.
Maria Magdalena. A San Nicolas Island native who may have been removed to San Pedro on the schooner Peores Nada. This woman was about 22 years old when she was baptized at the Los Angeles Plaza Church as Maria Magdalena in April 1836. She died less than 3 weeks later and was buried in the Los Angeles Plaza Church Cemetery. Her burial record clearly noted her origin as San Nicolas Island.
Tomas Guadalupe. The youngest of the Nicoleños who may have arrived in San Pedro on the schooner Peores Nada, which means better than nothing. This boy was about 5 years old and was baptized as Tomas Guadalupe in the Los Angeles Plaza Church in December of 1835. Which brings us to the lone woman of San Nicolas Island. Now, common knowledge said that all of the Nicoleños that arrived in Los Angeles died within a few years of arriving, which would make the woman left behind the last Nicoleño on Earth.
Wow. What happened to the lone woman of San Nicolas Island over the next 20 years became a source of great speculation. After the Nicoleños were evacuated from the island, ships continuously visited the island to hunt, and after these trips, they would report seeing a lone woman on the island. From a newspaper account in 1847,
quote, "Since our Crusoe became the sole monarch of the isle, San Nicolas has been visited perhaps 10 or 12 different times by different individuals. But there she has continued to be found, with none to dispute her right alone, solitary and forsaken. Her dress or covering is composed of the skins of small birds, which she kills with stones and sews together with a needle of bone and the light sinews of the hair seal, sometimes found dead among the rocks. Her only food is shellfish, of the mussel species, with now and then a still smaller fish, which the surf sometimes throws onto the beach. She never remains long in one spot, but is constantly wandering around the shores of the island, sleeping, which she seldom does, in small caves and crevices in the rocks."
During the last few years, it has been very difficult to obtain any communication with her. The article continues. At the approach of the white man, she flees, as from an evil spirit. Wise.
Valid.
Yeah. And the only way to detain her is by running her down, as you would the wild goat of the mountain or the young fawn of the plains. They said that in the same breath.
Can we not?
They didn't even include a full stop. Like, it's like she's running from an evil spirit or something. Anyway, these are the different ways we hunt her like an animal.
Right.
Okay, y'all.
Yeah.
Those who have seen her at the latest period report that she appears to have lost all knowledge of language. that she only makes a wild noise, altogether inhuman, and when taken and detained against her will, becomes frightened and restless. Shocking. Then, the moment she is liberated, she darts off and endeavors to secrete herself in the wild grass or amongst the rocks which hang over the never-ceasing turf. You don't say. Like, of course she runs away after you. Jesus.
Well, think first people came and they killed all the men and carried off the women. Second time people came, they carried off the young girl. Third time people came, they carried off the whole village and left her.
Mm-hmm.
And in describing
like to be the woman
hunting her down, I'm just like, or maybe she screams and makes noises to scare people because maybe these seal hunters that are at sea all the time have grabbed her and raped her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as is wont to do. Oh, I'm alone on this island and here's this vulnerable person that I can like chase down. Like, I can think of many reasons for this behavior. Like,
I can't think of many reasons why somebody would have the experience hunting her down, detaining her, and then letting her go.
Yeah.
Like,
you mean,
what are you doing?
Like, are you leaving out the rape part?
Are you bass fishing?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
The article continues. Every endeavor has been made and inducement offered by different individuals to prevail upon her to leave the island, but in vain. The only home she appears to desire is her own little isle. Her last hope, if she has any, is to finish her journey alone. She has no wish now to hear again the sweet music of speech. Its sounds are no longer music to her ear, and, as for civilized man, his tameness is shocking even to her dormant senses. Keep in mind, we're kind of in the Victorian period here, so like the romanticizing is a little bit kind of par for the course, but that's the purpose of this episode because I want to talk about this. Like this narrative, right? The last of her tribe, all alone, waiting to be rescued. The solitude of man, the soul, anima sola, right? Dark night of the soul, the tortured soul, the solitude, right? Like these are all themes that for the Victorian period were very robust in the literature. So it makes sense that this story kind of got picked up and why it became interesting to people, right? Is because the island is like, right, you can see it. You can pull out your telescope. I mean, it's right there, right? And like right there, a woman for like 20 years, right, is just there, surviving all by herself, like untouched, doesn't speak the language, just a primitive remnant of less civilized and evolved man. Like it has all the hallmarks of the shit that young, white, liberal, scholar bro dudes love to write poems about in the Victorian era, right? It's like to romanticize something quite brutal. Because why is she alone? Right. Why? Right? It's like you're skipping over like the part of the story that's horrible. Anyway, to all appearances, she is strong, healthy, and content to be alone. What can reconcile her to her lot? Who can conjecture? Humanity may hope that contentment may continue to be hers to the last hour, for she is destined to lie down and die alone on the cold shore of her island home, with no one to administer to her last wants and none to cover her cold body when the spirit shall have left the clay, unquote. And I get it. I mean, I think it's intriguing, this idea that someone would just choose to live alone, you know? But now also keep in mind, there was intercoastal trade, ships, things like that. This picture of her as someone stuck is a little silly. She could get in a right. She could go to another island. She could get a boat. She could go to San Pedro herself, cross open water. Her people had been doing it for thousands of years. She would have also heard stories about what happens to people that go over there. You feel me? Because they were talking, they were trading, they were talking, they were bringing stories back to the islands. I'm sure people were well aware of what would happen to you if you went to a mission, like what was waiting for you there, right?
Right.
Like it doesn't seem like that would like that's kind of creating this picture of her as somehow sort of very helpless, when in fact, at any moment, she could get in a boat and row her happy ass to shore if that's what she wanted, right?
Right.
I digress. So in the intervening years, people have gone, they've seen her. Now we're in 1853, okay? So she's been alone on the island for 18 years.
Okay.
So the newspaper is telling the story. At the beginning of the present month, an American, George Nidever, who is now and has long been a resident of Santa Barbara, was engaged in otter hunting off the coast and touched at San Nicolas. While traveling along the beach, to his great astonishment, he suddenly came upon this woman. She was engaged in cleaning or curing bird skins, which she sewed together to serve as a covering, and in a garment made of which she was dressed. She did not manifest much surprise at seeing Mr. Nidever, but readily assented to his proposition to leave the island and accompany him to his schooner.
Okay. She immediately set about making preparations for her departure, and having packed up several bundles of bird skins and other fixings, which she had found serviceable in San Nicolas, she bade adieu forever to the land. She, at this point, was now living with the family of Mr. George Nidever in Santa Barbara, where she has all her wants administered to. She is about 60 years old and is as simple as a child and quite free from deception and guile. One of the reverend clergymen of the Mission of Santa Barbara, accompanied by the writer, went to see her as soon as he heard of her arrival.
Ooh.
Okay.
Ooh. Ooh.
Christ.
The article continues. He brought with him one of the mission Indians who could speak the language of one or two tribes of the California Indians. She was greatly delighted to see this Indian, but neither of them could understand a word of what the other said. She has a distinct articulation for almost every object she sees, but no one understands her unless when she uses signs and gestures. She is very content and takes great delight in showing to her visitors, as well as she can, how she dug the roots, caught the fish, manufactured her garments, and provided generally for her sustenance. She signifies that she is much better pleased with her present mode of life than that she had on the island. She takes great delight in looking at horses and cows, having probably never seen 50 large animals before. On one occasion, she caught hold of a horse by the tail, and had it not been for Mrs. Nidever calling her away, she might probably have suffered severely for her ignorance. Look at the weird, cute little alien.
Dummy grabbed a horse tail.
Yeah.
Continuing. Among the articles she brought along with her from the island were several needles, with which she sewed the bird skins together. These needles are beautifully made of fish bones, and show a superior degree of ingenuity. The thread which she used was the thin fibers of the sinew from a whale. She also had several fishing hooks made of old nails that she probably found in some boards picked up on the shore. These nails were well bent and sharpened and attached to a line made of fibers of whale sinews, beautifully twisted together. She had also, among her movables, a soft, clayey substance like brick, but whether she used this for dressing the bird skins or for simply giving a red color to her garments, no one could well make out.
The article goes on. She had a knife also about an inch long, which seems to have been a piece of an iron hoop. It is set in a wooden handle. She brought with her some seal meat, but how she could eat this seems incomprehensible. 10 or 20 yards is about as near as the olfactory nerves would permit any of our party to go to it. She had a quantity of roots, which are generally known by the Indian name of cacumides. In taste, they are like the kernel of an unripe nut.
The article goes on. She is a strange specimen of the race and could give expression to her thoughts and feelings. She would be able to add a new chapter to the book of humanity. Oh, get off it. For 18 years has this poor creature lived alone on a desert island with no one to share her hopes or her fears, her joys or her sorrows, but the great being who gave her life and who has wonderfully preserved it under such extraordinary circumstances. The learned and pious Father Gonzalez regards it as a wonderful instance of the providence of God, who in his inscrutable ways has doubtless preserved her up to this time, as were some of her race in the truth of Christianity. I don't know the tone because it's written, so I just had to assume.
Yeah. It's gentle listeners. It's important to recognize that we are in Mexican Catholic California right after California's been part of America and not Mexico for like a year. So culturally speaking, like the culture of the place is very Catholic, like hardcore. Mm-hmm. So like people are people really like believed like this, like really, like for real, you know, like, so it's important to kind of just remember in the context, like it sounds funny to us, like these people truly believed this, like they truly believed that this was like God and providence and all the things, and that Christianity was saving souls. Like they really believed it. So it's important to kind of remember that context, because you're like, how could they do that to people? And it's like, because they thought God was telling them to. That's why, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, It's like there's a line from a William S. Burroughs poem where he's saying like to avoid the religious, and he's like I forget exactly how he phrases it, but he's like, never go into business with a Christian, because like they'll have no problem like you if they think God's on their side in the deal. And that's kind of accurate, right? And so that brings us to the end of part 1. Next week, we're going to learn the fate of the lone woman and how her story was leveraged to promote American exceptionalism in the face of the genocide of Native populations throughout the Americas through the publishing of a classic and beloved children's book called Island of the Blue Dolphins.
This is such a good episode arc. I am so thrilled to be learning and broadcasting this with you. This is top notch. I love you. I'm so glad to be back at the show. I've been gone for 2 episodes. I missed everybody. I missed you. I don't have the capacity to miss our listeners because this is very much a one-sided engagement. But in my heart of hearts, I did miss being heard, I guess. But most of all, we're done with the episode. Yeah. It's going to be a little aside now. I want to tell you how cool it is to be able to listen to the episodes that you and Josh recorded as a passive listener, as someone who, you know, I'm a fan of you. I love Joshy. I love our show. But to listen to it as just a listener made me realize that, like, if I wasn't on this show, I would subscribe to us all day.
What did you think of the Lisa Frank episode? Did you?
I thought it was fascinating. I told my mom about it a little bit. There's a lot that I didn't know about her. I was a big, big, big Lisa Frank fan in school. By the time I was in elementary school, that was in the discount section of like the school supplies. Mm-hmm. So I was allowed to get them. And also my grandmother sent money, so my mom would let me get like a cool binder. And we would set up our Lisa Frank folders in a little tent around our pop quizzes because, of course, we did. I had no idea she was averse to being on camera. I had no idea she was sort of at the forefront of a lot of IP licensing.
I thought that was fascinating.
All right. Let's shout out some patrons.
Yeah. This show is brought to you by.
Can I read them? Because there's a couple names on here that are very special.
Yeah, read them off.
So we've got Eric Anderson.
Yay.
MCF Fisher. Coven MTG, my dungeon master, my attorney, my homie.
Yeah.
Nick P. Jean Jeans. If I said it wrong, I'm sorry. Ms. Mary Cunningham, ma'am. Love the hell out of you. Jella de Schrijver, my Belgian boy. Bethann Cagney. And Everett, we appreciate you tipping us. We hope that we deliver enough to you to make it worth your contribution each month. And we are frequently discussing how we can thank you a little bit more without just expiring all of the energy and ability we have to function as human beings. So I just want you to know if you're backing us on Patreon, you mean the absolute hits to us.
Hell yeah.
Like the world.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, it's like, I'm very careful about the things I subscribe to. So I understand that it's an extra step. It's just like this extra step that you do. And so I totally appreciate it because I subscribe to Patreons of like 3 of my favorite podcasts. Like, I'm very picky about it. So, and I assume everyone's like me. So that means a lot that you're choosing
really
to throw that tip in the jar. It really means a lot. So thank you so much. We did it.
And thank you, Sovereign, for writing this amazing episode.
Please go out and vote. I'm voting for Kamala. If she does end up
register to vote now.
Oh, and if you're
Do it now.
I've been hearing a lot of people from Texas saying that when they went to go check their voter registration status, they were told that they had to update and fix it. And then they would go to update and fix it, and all the information was the same. And they've been going on social media and saying that never in the entire time that they have voted in Texas have they had that. So if you are in Texas and you are planning on voting, please go check your registration status now. So in case there's some kind of bureaucratic going on, like you can handle it well ahead of the day of the election. So stay woke. If you stay ready, you don't gotta be ready. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Anyway, I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Love you. And I love you, Sovereign. This episode was written by my homegirl, Sovereign Syre, was hosted by Savi and myself, Ella Darling, and was produced lovingly by our excellent producer, Mr. Joshua Anderson. Thank you so much.
Who had a great voice for podcasting.
Oh my God, that's the other thing.
I was shocked. I was like, what? I was like, damn.
I was shocked.
Damn. I was like, damn, he sounds great. Anyway.
Spread the good news.
Yes. See you guys next week. Take care of yourselves.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Stop being recorded.
Stop.